Sandpaper comes in a wide variety of colours. This is just a small sample. Generally the colour will reflect what the abrasive is, or perhaps who the manufacturer was. There are no real hard and fast rules, except to say that the cheaper papers tend to clog up quicker than the more expensive ones, and so you'll use more of them more quickly. That doesn't mean to say they end up being more expensive, because as I say, they're cheaper in the first place. You just have to experiment and see how you get on with them. It's usually best to wrap your sandpaper around a block to save copying the imprint of your hand on whatever you're sanding. Nice flat MDF block is what I use. This is just a rectangle of MDF with 2 slots cut, one on each side. Then I can take a piece of sandpaper, cut to the right width, slide one edge in on the one side, wrap it round, and then tuck the other edge in on the other side. They're so easy to make, you might as well make 3 or 4 the same size and charge them up with different grit sandpapers, and make some of different sizes as well. I did just mention grit, and grit refers to the size of the particles that are on the paper, and that reflects in how aggressive it is at removing the wood. There's a large number of different grits. All you need to know really is if you've got a lot of wood to remove when you're sanding, you start with a lower number of grit, which will remove stuff quicker. Make your way up through the numbers until you get the smoothness of surface finish that you want. For most projects that might be 240 or 320. For dense hardwoods you might even want to go up higher, 400 or more, where just sandpaper alone can give you a really shiny finish. Now I'm talking about sandpaper, but I don't really like it. I try and avoid it wherever possible by using a smoothing plane or a card scraper, which can often leave a surface as good if not better than fine sandpaper. Sometimes you'll need to use sandpaper, and when you do you'll need to know how to cut the sheets down in size. I've just cut this sheet into halves and I want to cut it into quarters now for my sanding block. I fold it with the abrasive on the outside, squeeze it down, fold it back on itself once, and you can either tear it here simply by pulling it apart like a sheet of paper, or with the abrasive on the outside again, use a steel rule and whip it along the crease. It's that easy. Don't use a knife to do it or a pair of scissors, because you'll just blunt the blades with the abrasive. You should always sand with the grain. So in a situation like this, where I've got a joint, I want to sand this piece in that direction and this piece in that direction. Reason being, if you sand across the grain, you're cutting the fibres of the wood and leaving scratches behind. Whereas if you're going in the same direction as the grain, any scratches you leave get amalgamated within the grain and you can't see them. So in this situation, if the joint's already glued up, you'll want your paper to go right to the end of your block, and then it's a good idea to take another piece of wood, a little bit of scrap, line your block up on the end of the one piece of wood, push the block on there nice and tight so that it will stop your sanding when you get there, and then sand up to the block, shuffle and come back, up, shuffle and back. And then when we're doing the other one, you can see we're passing by this section, so put a block on that's going to stop the sanding right at the joint line, and then sand as normal right up to your block. If you've got a curved joint, the best way to do it is to cut yourself a sanding block that matches that curve, stick the sandpaper onto the block and then sand right up to the curve and back. For internal corners, as long as your sandpaper doesn't come past the end of the block, you can sand right up to the joint. So, there's just a few tips on sanding. It's time to finish off our stool. All the surfaces are pretty smooth from planing, but this wood is a little bit awkward and there are a few rough patches here and there, so I'm going to give it a sand. I've got a 180 grit paper here on my block and I'm just going to give it a few strokes. That doesn't actually feel any smoother, in fact it feels a little bit rougher, but it feels consistent, which is what we look for when we're sanding. Now I can move up through these sandpaper grits to a finer and finer one until I get the smoothness that I want. I've highlighted the Japanese kanji with some water-based black paint. With the stool nicely sanded, dusted off and hoovered off, it's now time to apply a finish. And I'm going to use tung oil, and on my first coat I'm going to thin it down 50-50 with white spirits. It's just applied with either a paper towel or lint-free cloth, and then after a couple of minutes any excess wiped off. It's a very simple finish to apply, and you can then take a second coat with perhaps thinned down with just 1 part white spirits to 3 parts tung oil, and then after that pure tung oil, and just put on as many coats as you want to achieve the luster that you want. To make sure you can access as many areas as possible, remove the wedges. But don't forget to finish the wedges as well. Don't forget to wipe the excess off after a few minutes, otherwise you'll end up with a really sticky mess that's hard to remove. Old cotton socks are really good for this. Now I'll leave that for probably a day before I put a next coat on, which I'll probably thin down about 3:1 with white spirits. Now it's never happened to me, and I've never met anyone that it has happened to, but it is said that rags with these sorts of spirit based and oil based finishes can combust if they're just left around screwed up like this. So your best bet is either to put them into a sealed container and they can't get any air at them, or to open them out and dry them as quickly as you can. I usually just put mine outside.